At 1 a.m., my parents texted, "We know you spent $200,000 to save our house, but your sister doesn't want you at Thanksgiving." I just replied, "Noted." That was the night they realized. I was done being taken for granted. But before we continue, if you love stories like this, hit that subscribe button so you'll always be the first to know when a new one drops. It was late on a Thursday night, a time when most people are winding down, but for me, sleep was impossible. I was sitting in my apartment, surrounded by papers, bills, and a crushing sense of duty that I could never seem to shake. For weeks, my parents' voices had echoed in my head, stressed, desperate, terrified about losing the family house. They never asked for help outright, but their hints were clear. The bank was calling. The mortgage was months overdue, and their pride wouldn't allow them to admit just how close they were to disaster. Maybe that's why, when I saw the final notice from the bank, I felt something inside me snap. I couldn't stand the idea of my childhood home, the place where every birthday and Christmas had been celebrated, the place I thought held us together, being taken away. So, I made the decision that night. I transferred $200,000 from my savings and investments, years of hard work, late nights, and scrimping for a future I hadn't even imagined yet, all gone in the click of a button. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest friends. There was no ceremony, no dramatic announcement, just the cold, digital confirmation from my bank, and the hope that maybe, finally, my parents would see me. I imagined their relief, the grateful phone call, the tearful thanks. Maybe this would be the moment things changed, when I stopped being the afterthought and started being their child again. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with what-ifs and the memory of my mother's anxious voice. By morning, I was exhausted but oddly hopeful. I wanted to believe that this sacrifice, this enormous, silent gift, would finally mean something. Maybe Thanksgiving would be different this year. Maybe I'd have a place at the table not because I was expected, but because I was wanted. I tried to focus on work, but my thoughts kept drifting to the old house with its creaky floors and worn-out wallpaper, to my father's stubborn pride, and my mother's nervous laughter when things got hard. I replayed all the times I'd tried to help before, fixing things, offering advice, only to be brushed aside in favor of my sister's opinions, my sister's needs. But I told myself this time would be different. Money talked, didn't it? Surely a $200,000 gesture couldn't be ignored. As the day went on, I waited for a sign. A text, a call, anything. The silence felt heavy, but I clung to hope, telling myself they must be overwhelmed, too shocked to respond. I checked my phone every hour, my heart jumping at every buzz. Night fell, and the city outside my window glowed with warm lights and distant laughter, but inside I felt the old chill, like I was still on the outside looking in. Still, I believed I had to. If this didn't change things, what would? In that quiet, lonely apartment, I tried to picture a different kind of future. One where I wasn't just the backup, the emergency plan, but a real part of the family. I wanted to believe my sacrifice would mean something more than a line on a bank statement, that it would finally buy me a seat at the table, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of love. It was almost 1 a.m. when my phone lit up with a message that instantly chased away any lingering hope I had been holding on to. The room was dark, the city silent except for the occasional car passing by, and I was wide awake, mindlessly scrolling through emails, half waiting for a thank you from my parents. Instead, their names flashed on the screen with a message that felt colder than any silence could. "We know you spent $200,000 to save our house, but your sister doesn't want you at Thanksgiving." I stared at those words, reading them again and again as if some hidden kindness would reveal itself the more I looked. There was no thank you. No acknowledgement of the nights I had stayed awake worrying about them, the years I had worked to build up enough savings to even have that kind of money, the courage it took to give it away. Just a matter-of-fact confirmation of what I had done, followed by a reminder that my place in the family was always conditional, always second to my sister's whims. For a second, I wondered if it was some sort of cruel joke, if maybe I was missing context, if maybe I would get another message with an apology or some explanation. But nothing came. Just those words sitting heavy on my phone, as unmovable as the feeling of rejection that started to grow in my chest. I tried to process it. How could they exclude me after everything I had just done? Did my sister really have that much power over them? Was it so easy to erase me from the holiday, from the family, just because it made things easier for her? I imagined her, smug and satisfied, sitting in the old living room I'd just paid to save, setting the table for Thanksgiving while I was left out in the cold. I wanted to scream, to cry, to call and demand an answer, but all I could do was sit there, frozen, with that message burning a hole in my heart. The irony was bitter. I had just done the thing everyone always says families are supposed to do: sacrifice, help, put others first. And all it had gotten me was another closed door. There was no warmth in their words, just an administrative kind of cruelty, as if I were being notified of a canceled appointment instead of a canceled relationship. The pain was sharp, but underneath it something else started to rise. Anger, exhaustion, the slow realization that maybe nothing I did would ever be enough. I wondered how long I had been holding out for some kind of approval, how many times I had let myself believe that this time things would change. I lay back on my bed, staring at the ceiling, phone still in my hand, the message etched into my mind. It was so clear now. My parents had made their choice, and it wasn't me. My role was to save them, then step aside, never expecting anything in return. At 1 a.m., I learned what gratitude meant in my family, and for the first time, I wondered what would happen if I finally stopped playing along. Growing up, my sister was always the center of the universe, the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was the afterthought, the reliable backup plan whenever something needed fixing or someone needed to take the blame. It wasn't that I didn't love her at first. I did, fiercely, the way younger siblings often idolize their elders. But over the years, that love curdled into something bitter as I watched her manipulate my parents with ease. She could turn on the tears in an instant, spin a story that painted her as the victim, and somehow I was always the one left cleaning up the mess or apologizing on her behalf. Even as adults, nothing changed. My parents still hung on her every word, trusting her instincts over my facts, her complaints over my silence. When she wanted something, the family bent to her will: vacation destinations, holiday menus, even who was allowed to be invited. If I objected, I was difficult, selfish, or overly sensitive. I learned to swallow my opinions, keep the peace, and offer help quietly, never expecting anything back. It was like watching someone else live my life. She got the attention, the support, the unconditional love, while I got polite nods and the occasional "we're proud of you," always with a sense of obligation. She used to laugh about it, joking that she was the favorite, but there was always a glint in her eye that told me she knew exactly how much power she held. I tried to be understanding, telling myself that families are complicated and parents aren't perfect, but every year the gap between us grew. I went to college on scholarships, built my own life, and even tried to include her in my successes. But she only reached out when she needed something: money, advice, a shoulder to cry on when her relationships imploded. The few times I pushed back, my parents called, worried about family unity, always urging me to forgive and forget. When I bought my own apartment, they praised my independence but spent more time gushing about my sister's new boyfriend or her latest work drama. I realized slowly and painfully that my role was never going to change, no matter how much I gave or how hard I tried. Even now, after saving the house, I could see her fingerprints all over the 1 a.m. text. She probably went to them in tears, telling them how uncomfortable she would feel if I was at Thanksgiving, how she just needed space. They never once asked what I needed or how I felt. My sacrifice was an afterthought, my presence an inconvenience. It hurt, more than I wanted to admit. To know that even a $200,000 gesture couldn't compete with her ability to command the room, the conversation, and ultimately, my parents' loyalty. The worst part was realizing that maybe, just maybe, she enjoyed it. The subtle power to banish me, even as she benefited from my help. I could picture her at the dinner table, making a joke at my expense, my parents laughing along, grateful for the peace she brought simply by being there. But for the first time, that image didn't make me feel small. Instead, it made me question why I'd ever fought so hard to be part of it at all. Maybe it was time to step out of her shadow and find out who I could be without her approval, or theirs. Looking back, it's almost laughable how many signs I ignored. How many little moments over the years made it clear that my place in the family was never secure, never unconditional. I remember being 8 years old, coming home with a perfect report card, the kind with gold stars and beaming teachers' comments, only for my parents to glance at it, nod politely, and immediately shift their attention to my sister's drama at school that day. She had forgotten her lunch or gotten into an argument with a friend, and suddenly my small victory was erased, swallowed up by the gravity of her world. Birthdays blurred together, mine always quieter, sometimes forgotten entirely until my mom rushed out to buy a cake at the last minute. My sisters, by contrast, were planned for weeks, the house decorated, the guest list growing each year. If I mentioned feeling left out, I was told not to make a fuss, that some people just need more attention. In high school, when I got accepted into an honors program, my dad congratulated me distractedly, his eyes on his phone, waiting for updates about my sister's college applications. When she struggled, the whole family rallied around her. When I struggled, I learned to keep it to myself. Even holidays reflected the divide. Thanksgiving meant I helped set the table, cleaned up after everyone else, and listened as my sister held court, regaling everyone with her stories and opinions. My attempts to join the conversation were often interrupted or talked over, my contributions treated like background noise. Sometimes guests would notice, asking how I was doing, but my parents would brush off the question or redirect the focus back to her. I can't count how many times I felt invisible, standing in a room full of people who shared my last name, but seemed to share nothing else. I tried everything, excelling at school, working hard at my first job, volunteering, quietly making myself useful in hopes that someone would finally see me, really see me, and not just what I could do for them. But it never came. Instead, my role was cemented. Dependable, responsible, but ultimately disposable when it suited the family narrative. Even as an adult, when I got promoted or achieved something important, my parents would offer a perfunctory congratulations before segueing into my sister's latest crisis or celebration. When she had a breakup, I was expected to call her, comfort her, even send flowers on behalf of the family. When I was heartbroken, no one noticed. I began to wonder if maybe something was wrong with me, if I was too quiet or too different, if my needs were just less important. I stopped bringing friends home, tired of watching them marvel at the obvious favoritism. At family gatherings, I learned to fade into the background, to swallow disappointment and force a smile, always hoping for a scrap of recognition that never came. Over time, it became easier to keep my distance emotionally, even as I continued to help, to show up, to play my assigned role. The $200,000 wasn't the first time I sacrificed for them. It was just the biggest, the one I thought would finally tip the scales. But as I stared at my phone, the harsh reality settled in. No matter how much I gave, I would always be the one left out, the one overlooked, the one whose absence made things easier for everyone else. It was a truth I had always known deep down, but that night, it finally became impossible to ignore. That night, staring at my phone in the darkness, I felt something inside me snap in a way it never had before. Years of being overlooked, years of being the silent fixer, years of believing that if I just tried a little harder or gave a little more, I would finally matter to them. Suddenly, all of it felt absurd, like a story I had been telling myself out of habit. My parents' message hung in the air, cold and final. Their gratitude measured only in acknowledgement of the money, not the sacrifice or the love that fueled it. But it was the second half that did the real damage, being excluded, not even for something I'd done wrong, but simply because my sister didn't want me there. I read it again and again, searching for a loophole, a hint of regret, but it wasn't there. Just a statement of fact, as if my presence was a logistical problem they had solved. In that moment, I realized that nothing I did would ever change the story in their heads. I could give and give until there was nothing left of me, and it still wouldn't buy their love or approval. My hands trembled as I typed my reply, a single word that summed up everything I was feeling: anger, exhaustion, hurt, and finally, acceptance. Noted. I sent it before I could second-guess myself, before I could backtrack or soften the blow. The instant the message left my phone, a strange calm washed over me. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight begin to lift, replaced by something close to relief. I didn't owe them another explanation. I didn't owe them my presence, my time, or my forgiveness. I was done being the backup plan, the safety net, the emotional punching bag. It was a tiny act of rebellion, barely a ripple in their world, but it was seismic for me. I sat there in the dark, feeling the years of effort and longing fall away, replaced by a quiet, stubborn kind of self-respect. It wasn't just about Thanksgiving or the $200,000 or even my sister's manipulations. It was about finally seeing my own worth, apart from what I could do for people who refused to see me. I thought about calling a friend, about pouring out my heart to someone who might actually care. But instead, I just let myself sit with the feeling. It was raw and painful, but also strangely empowering. I was done chasing a version of family that had never existed for me. If this was what it meant to be on my own, then so be it. I could build a life where I was wanted, where I was chosen, not just tolerated or used. As the first hints of dawn crept through the window, I knew things would never be the same. I wouldn't beg for a place at the table. I wouldn't apologize for putting myself first. My parents and my sister could have their Thanksgiving, their old patterns, their comfortable stories. I was done participating in my own erasure. That single word, noted, was more than a reply. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, one where I finally got to decide what I was worth. After I sent that single word reply, the silence was immediate but heavy with meaning, like a storm gathering just out of sight. For years, I'd always been the one to follow up, to check in, to smooth things over. So when I didn't, the absence was deafening in its own way. The next morning, my phone began to buzz with a series of messages from my mother, short, clipped attempts at normalcy, asking if I was okay, if I'd be coming to Christmas, if I was upset about something. I ignored them, not out of spite, but out of exhaustion. For once, I wasn't going to be the one to fix things. My father called that evening, his voice gruff and awkward, leaving a voicemail that danced around any real apology. He mentioned the house, thanked me again in a tone that felt transactional, then mumbled something about family dynamics and how these things blow over. My sister didn't reach out at all, which was telling in its own way. I watched as the group chat stayed eerily quiet, everyone waiting for me to cave and send some olive branch, some signal that I was willing to sweep it all under the rug for the sake of keeping the peace. But I didn't. Days turned into a week, and the messages shifted from confusion to concern to subtle guilt tripping. My mom sent photos of the family getting ready for Thanksgiving, my sister smiling in front of the house I'd saved, the table being set, everyone looking pointedly happy. The captions were cheerful on the surface, but laced with passive-aggressive undertones. Wish you were here. It's not the same without you. I could feel their discomfort growing as my silence stretched on, a void they didn't know how to fill without my usual placating presence. Relatives started reaching out, some genuinely worried, others parroting whatever narrative my parents had told them. A cousin called to say she'd heard I was busy with work and hoped I'd make time for family soon. An aunt sent a long email about forgiveness and how life is too short for grudges, never once asking for my side of the story. I realized then how little anyone outside our immediate family knew about what really went on, about the years of favoritism, the constant minimizing of my feelings. From the outside, we were a perfectly normal family. But inside, everything had always been conditional, always a negotiation of who mattered most. The pressure to respond, to explain myself, grew with each passing day. But I held firm. I wasn't going to let them rewrite the story, to cast me as the difficult one simply because I'd finally set a boundary. For the first time, I watched as they scrambled to make sense of a version of me that didn't fit their expectations, a version that didn't fold under pressure or return out of guilt. The power dynamic shifted in tiny, almost imperceptible ways. My parents' messages became more frantic, more pleading, as if they were suddenly aware that they could lose me for real this time. My sister, I heard through a cousin, was upset that everyone was making a big deal out of nothing, unable to understand why her wishes didn't just automatically take precedence. The family equilibrium was off, and everyone felt it. What they didn't realize was that for me, the fallout was less about drama and more about clarity. I had nothing left to prove. I was no longer interested in earning a seat at a table where I was only ever a guest, never truly at home. The silence I gave them was the most honest thing I'd ever offered. It was the sound of my self-worth finally speaking louder than their expectations. As Thanksgiving approached, I watched the familiar rituals unfold from a distance, detached and almost curious to see how the family would manage without their designated peacekeeper. In the past, I was always the one making sure everyone got along, smoothing over awkward silences, cleaning up after the meal while my parents and sister basked in the warmth of their own comfort. This year, my absence was like a missing note in a song, disrupting the harmony in subtle but undeniable ways. My mother continued to send updates, photos of the turkey in the oven, my father carving it with his usual precision, my sister holding court at the head of the table, her smile a little too bright. They tried to recreate the image of a perfect family, but there was a stiffness to it, a performative quality that made it all feel hollow. Friends reached out, some invited me to join their celebrations, and for the first time, I considered what it might be like to spend the holiday somewhere I was genuinely wanted. I declined most invitations, not out of sadness, but out of a quiet need to process, to reclaim the day for myself. I ordered takeout, watched my favorite movies, and allowed myself to grieve the loss of the family I had always hoped to have. Meanwhile, the family group chat was filled with photos and well wishes, but my absence became the unspoken elephant in the room. Relatives commented on how quiet things seemed, how different it felt without me. My parents' smiles were strained, my sister's laughter a little forced, the energy just slightly off balance. I heard later from a cousin that there had been arguments, my sister snapping when someone mentioned my name, my mother getting teary-eyed after dinner, my father retreating to his study earlier than usual. The house I'd saved was still standing, warm and bright, but the foundation felt shakier than ever. I wondered if any of them realized what it cost to keep it all together, if they understood now that my presence was not a given, but a choice. I thought about the years I had spent sacrificing my own comfort for theirs, always showing up, always helping, always hoping for a scrap of genuine appreciation. Now, for the first time, they had to sit with the discomfort of my absence, to face the awkward silences and unresolved tensions without me there to absorb them. It wasn't revenge in the dramatic sense, but it was its own kind of reckoning, a quiet reminder that even the most dependable person has a breaking point. I didn't feel triumphant or vindictive, I just felt free. Free from the pressure to perform, free from the cycle of giving and being overlooked, free to decide what family meant to me. That Thanksgiving, I realized I didn't need a seat at their table to feel whole. I could build my own traditions, choose my own company, and finally honor the parts of myself that had been ignored for so long. My family may not have understood it, but for the first time I did. I belonged to myself, and that was enough. With Thanksgiving behind me and the holiday season looming, I felt a strange mix of grief and liberation swirling inside. The absence of family obligations left a space in my life that was both raw and full of possibility, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to ask what I truly wanted. What brought me peace? What made me feel alive? Instead of chasing after family approval, I poured my energy into the friendships I'd neglected, the passions I'd set aside, the goals I'd put on hold while prioritizing everyone else's happiness. I reached out to friends I hadn't seen in ages, accepted invitations without hesitation, and let myself enjoy the simple, unfiltered joy of being wanted for who I was, not for what I could provide. My career, which had always been a safe haven, became a place of genuine pride and satisfaction rather than a fallback for emotional validation. I took on new challenges, volunteered for projects that excited me, and started to see myself as capable and valuable in ways that had nothing to do with my family's narrative. Weekends became opportunities to explore the city, try new restaurants, and rediscover the things that used to make me happy before the constant pressure to keep the peace at home took over my life. For the first time, I slept through the night without waking up in a panic over someone else's crisis, and I woke up each morning without the heavy dread of not being enough. It was disorienting at first, this freedom, but soon it began to feel like oxygen, clean, necessary, and long overdue. I invested in myself, signing up for classes, joining groups, and filling my calendar with things that sparked genuine interest rather than obligation. I realized how much time I'd lost waiting for approval that would never come. How many opportunities I'd passed up to avoid upsetting the fragile balance at home. As the days passed, I grew stronger, more certain of my own value. I started setting boundaries in other parts of my life too, learning to say no without guilt, to ask for what I needed, to trust my instincts instead of second-guessing every decision. I allowed myself to grieve too, to mourn the fantasy of a family that would one day see me, love me, choose me. There were nights when the loneliness hit hard, when the silence felt sharp and unforgiving. But even then, I knew I was finally honoring my own truth. The people who stuck around, the friends who checked in, the colleagues who celebrated my wins, the neighbors who invited me over, became my chosen family. Their kindness a balm for wounds I had stopped trying to hide. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the shame and self-doubt I'd carried for so long began to lift, replaced by a quiet, steady confidence. I could see myself clearly for the first time, not as the backup or the fixer, but as someone deserving of care and respect. The world didn't end when I stopped chasing after my family's affection. In fact, it opened up in ways I never could have imagined, offering me a chance to build a life on my own terms. Reclaiming my life wasn't about dramatic gestures or grand statements. It was about 1,000 small choices, each one a step toward wholeness. I was finally, irrevocably, enough. Weeks after Thanksgiving had come and gone, I was settling into my new routine, finding comfort in the unfamiliar quiet and strength in my reclaimed independence, when I received an unexpected message from my parents. It arrived one afternoon, a simple text that read, "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, torn between curiosity and the old instinct to brace myself for disappointment. I hesitated for hours, weighing whether I wanted to reopen the door I'd finally closed, but something in the brevity of their words told me this was different. When I finally agreed to a call, their voices were hesitant, subdued, a far cry from the confident authority they'd always carried. My mother apologized first, her words stumbling over each other as she tried to explain how they'd been caught up in the moment, how they never meant to hurt me, how Thanksgiving wasn't the same without me. My father followed, less eloquent but no less sincere, admitting that they hadn't realized how much they relied on me to hold everything together until I was gone. There was a pause as they both waited for me to rush in and reassure them, to promise that everything was forgiven and forgotten. But this time, I held my ground. I told them the truth, calmly, without anger or accusation, that their apology was a start. But it couldn't undo years of being overlooked, years of conditional love and one-sided sacrifice. I explained how their decision to exclude me had forced me to confront the reality of our relationship, how it had hurt in ways money could never fix, and how I was no longer willing to accept a role that left me feeling invisible. My mother cried, my father apologized again, and for the first time, I didn't rush to comfort them. Instead, I set boundaries, clear, specific, non-negotiable. I said that I was open to rebuilding our relationship, but only if it was based on mutual respect and genuine care, not obligation or guilt. I told them that I would no longer tolerate being sidelined or used as the family's safety net, that any relationship going forward would have to be earned, not assumed. It was terrifying and liberating all at once, to finally say out loud what I had always felt. My parents listened, not defensively, but with an openness I hadn't seen before, and while I knew things wouldn't change overnight, I felt the first stirrings of hope. My sister didn't call or message, and I realized I was okay with that. Her silence spoke volumes, and for once, I was no longer desperate for her approval. In the days that followed, my parents sent small gestures, checking in without expectation, asking about my life, offering support instead of requests. I responded cautiously, determined to protect the boundaries I had fought so hard to build, but also willing to see if change was possible. Their apology didn't erase the past, but it marked a turning point, a chance for healing on my terms. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about letting them off the hook. It was about freeing myself from the weight of old wounds and reclaiming my power. I had made it clear that I would never again settle for less than I deserved, and for the first time, I believed it. In the months that followed, I felt the shift in myself more than I saw it in my family. I kept my boundaries firm, engaging with my parents on my terms and never letting guilt or old habits pull me back into the role of fixer. Sometimes they slipped. Sometimes they tried to fall into old patterns. But each time I stood my ground, reminding myself that I owed them only honesty, not obedience. The relationship became less about obligation and more about choice. When I answered the phone, when I visited, even when I shared parts of my life. There were awkward conversations, moments of silence that stretched longer than before, but there was also a new respect, tentative and uncertain, but real. I forgave them, not in the sense of forgetting what happened or pretending it never hurt, but in letting go of the hope that the past could have been different. I accepted that my family would never be perfect, that I would never be their golden child, and that was okay. I stopped measuring my worth by their standards and started honoring the person I'd become. Resilient, compassionate, independent. I learned to celebrate my own victories, to build my own traditions, to choose people who chose me back. I made peace with the parts of myself that had always been too much or not enough for them, and discovered that outside their shadow, I was capable of joy I hadn't known was possible. Holidays came and went, sometimes with tentative invitations, sometimes with none at all, but I no longer felt the ache of being left out. Instead, I felt free to love on my terms, to walk away from relationships that drained me, to invest in the life I wanted rather than the one I was expected to live. I watched as my parents slowly adjusted to a version of me that refused to be erased. And while they sometimes struggled, they also began to see me not as an extension of themselves or a safety net for my sister, but as a whole person with boundaries and dreams of my own. My sister stayed distant, her silence no longer a weapon but a simple fact. And I let it be, grateful for the clarity it brought. In choosing myself, I found a peace that no amount of family approval could have ever given me. I became my own advocate, my own safe place, and in doing so, discovered a strength I never knew I had. The lesson was hard-won but simple. Sometimes the only way to be free is to walk away from what hurts, to build a family out of those who truly see you, and to realize that your worth was never theirs to decide. In the end, the real revenge was living a life that felt like my own, unburdened by the need to be chosen by people who never really saw me. I let go, I moved forward, and for the first time I was truly home.